historically, they've been more common in lower elevation lodgepole pine forests. But recently, there's been a significant, substantial amount of whitebark pine mortality from mountain pine beetles. This map shows, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you get a little bit closer? We have some people that are having some trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. This is a map showing forested areas in gray with areas with whitebark pine mortality from beetles in red. And the time series along the bottom is showing the area with observed mortality in the greater Yellowstone region beginning in 1998 through 2009. And this recent outbreak has affected about 66% of the range of whitebark pines in the greater Yellowstone. And the photo on the right, that's what a tree that's been attacked by mountain pine beetles looks like. The needles all turn red because the tree has died. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background on the life cycle of mountain pine beetles. As I said, it's a native insect that has been most common in the lodgepole pine forest. And as adults, the beetles fly to trees where they bore through the bark, and they're trying to construct egg galleries to lay their eggs. And as they bore through the bark and begin constructing those galleries, they emit a pheromone, which is a chemical signal to other beetles that says, come attack this tree. Everybody, concentrate on this tree, because then a massive attack of beetles can overcome the defenses that a tree mounts to prevent that attack. When an attack is successful, the eggs are laid in the galleries. They develop then through the fall into larvae, and come winter, development stops, and they overwinter in the larval stage. In the spring, as temperatures warm, development resumes again, and then till the following summer when new adults emerge and fly to attack new trees. So a tree that is red this summer was actually killed the previous year. Now, there are a couple places in this life cycle where climate plays a really important role. And first, adaptive seasonality. This is for the beetles to have a one-year life cycle and to have a synchronous development such that there's a mass emergence of adults in late summer. This is known as adaptive seasonality. And this depends strictly on temperature. Their development rates, each life stage has an optimum temperature for development. And so this life cycle is controlled strictly by temperature. Another important point in this life cycle is during the winter. The larvae develop cold hardiness, and the later larval stage are the most cold tolerant, but temperatures low enough can kill even those cold hardened larvae. And so winter beetle mortality becomes important, particularly in these higher elevation whitebark pine forests. Then another important place is when the adults are attacking trees. And as I said, the trees have some defensive abilities. They try to literally pitch out the beetles using the pine pitch. And this photo is showing a pitch tube on a whitebark pine where the tree is trying to eject the beetle from it before it can get in and lay its egg galleries. But a tree that is experiencing drought stress then doesn't have as much resource to allocate to defense. It's allocating more of its resources to simply surviving and storing carbohydrates. And so a weakened tree can be successfully attacked and killed by fewer beetles than a healthy tree can. But even a healthy tree can be successfully attacked and killed given a large enough beetle population. And this defensive capability has been fairly well studied in lodgepole pines, but its thought and initial research has been showing that whitebark have a lower defensive capability, although they still obviously do have some ability to defend themselves. And it's thought that they have this lower ability because they've had less interaction with mountain pine beetles through their evolutionary history. because they live in the higher elevation, colder places. So our research objectives, we had 3 primary objectives. First was to quantify the climate-beetle relationships in white bark pine. Second was to understand the causes of the recent outbreak. And third, to estimate the historical, current, and future weather suitability for beetle attacks in white bark pine. We divided the range of white bark pine in the western U.S. into 3 different geographic regions, and today I'll be focusing just on the results for the greater Yellowstone area. So to get to Objective 1, to address Objective 1, we used statistical modeling, or developed a model of the probability of tree mortality given fuel pressure and stand structure conditions and climate conditions. Our response variable is the presence of white bark pine mortality from mountain pine beetles, and this comes from Forest Service aerial detection survey data in which observers in aircraft record the tree species and the mortality agent as they fly regions in the western U.S., and this has been done in Canada as well. And this was gridded to a 1-kilometer spatial resolution by Arjen Meddens and others. For explanatory variables of beetle pressure, we had 2 variables. One was local beetle pressure, which was the number of trees killed last year within that 1-kilometer cell. And second was dispersal beetle pressure. That's the number of trees killed last year in a 6-kilometer radius outside of that focal cell. We wanted to separate the effects of beetles developing locally or those coming in from somewhere else. And these again come from the aerial detection survey data. For stand structure, we represented that with the remaining white bark pine. Because we're working at a 1-kilometer spatial resolution, that equals 100 hectares. So 100 minus the cumulative mortality area since the outbreak began in 1997 gave us an estimate of the potential remaining white bark pine. We also used the percent white bark pine in each grid cell, and this comes from a 30-meter map of the range of white bark pine developed specifically for the greater Yellowstone area by Lisa Landenberger and others. And finally, we evaluated some data sets that provide estimates of tree biomass and tree diameter or tree size and basal area. But there were too many places where the aerial detection survey indicated a very high number of trees killed, and one or all of these databases had no biomass or a diameter of 0, indicating it was not forested, or a basal area of 0. And therefore, we were unable to include any of these in our analysis, unfortunately. For climate, we represented the process of adaptive seasonality with several variables using average fall and spring temperatures. And this comes from 800-meter PRISM data. We also used the Logan Adaptive Seasonality Probability, which is a process model developed to estimate the probability of a 1-year life cycle with synchronous development and mass emergence, and several daily temperature metrics that describe length of cold snap and beetle development days similar to growing degree days. And these daily and adaptive seasonality probabilities come from a software, BioSim software, along with weather station, daily weather station data. And these variables, we looked at the current year, which would have been the winter before the tree was killed, the fall before the tree was killed, and the previous year to capture the possibility of there being a 2-year life cycle, not just a 1-year life cycle. Beetle winter mortality we represented with 2 different variables. The minimum winter temperature, which is the minimum monthly December, January, February temperature, again from PRISM 800-meter data, and cold tolerance, which is another process model that predicts probability of beetle survival over the winter, which again comes from the BioSim modeling framework. And these we also represented with both the current and previous year to capture this possibility of a 2-year life cycle. Tree drought stress, we used water year precipitation, summer precipitation, climatic water deficit, and vapor pressure deficit. And previous research has indicated that there's a range of timing of drought that can be important, affecting tree defensive capabilities. So we included the current through 5-year lag for each of these variables, and these come from monthly PRISM data. In our model structure, we use a logistic model. It's a binary response to presence or absence of tree mortality. And we use a generalized additive model, which allows for a nonlinear relationship between the explanatory and response variable. And we developed a set of candidate models, each of which had representations of beetle pressure, stand structure, and one variable representing adaptive seasonality, winter mortality, and tree drought stress. Then we used an AIC model selection process with this set of candidate models to select the very best model. Then to address objectives 2 and 3, which were what were the causes of the recent outbreak and what did historical and what will future weather suitability look like, we took our best model and applied it to historical weather using monthly PRISM data from 1900 through 2009, and then to future projections. And here we wanted to be sure to capture a range of future possibilities. So we used 10 different general circulation models, or GCMs, under 3 emission scenarios. These are RCP 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5. These represent low, medium, and high emission scenarios. So after applying the model to these data sets, we then calculated a weather suitability index as the sum of the weather terms in the model. Now, our best model, on to results. Our best model, we retained both the local and dispersal beetle pressure, percent white bark pine representing stand structure. For adaptive seasonality, this is best represented by the combination of fall temperature and spring and summer temperature. Beetle winter mortality was best represented by winter minimum temperature, and tree drought stress by the cumulative 2-year summer precipitation. So we wanted to know, well, how well did the model do? And this shows in black the observed area with mortality each year, and in red the predicted area with mortality, with the dashed lines the 95% confidence interval. And so the predictions are very similar to the observations. Spatially as well, the predictions are similar to the observations. These maps show the cumulative years with mortality, the light blue being no years, and to the bright pink being up to 11 years with mortality. And again, we felt the model did quite well capturing the temporal and spatial variability, so we felt we could move on to address objective 1, which is what are the climate beetle relationships in white bark pine. So each of these next slides will have the line graph on the top, which describes the relationship between the variable and the probability of tree mortality, and a histogram on the bottom showing you the distribution of that variable in the input data. So here on the left is fall temperature, and if fall